Good evening, and welcome to Fireline. For those tuning into our discussion, truly rather timely, regarding a recent report that had appeared in the nation's leading business publication, the Wall Street Journal, titled Lab Leak, Most Likely Origin of the COVID-19 Pandemic, Energy Department now says. A topic that has attracted much commentary, especially among Republican leaders in Congress, and most certainly galvanizing support for what has been somewhat of a bastard child alternative, quite often ostracized, at least in the past. It's rather fringe. I believe the term used had been crackpot conspiracy for the origins of a global public health crisis, for which reporters of the Wall Street Journal have attributed a worldwide death toll exceeding some 15 million, over double the figures now being reported by the World Health Organization. However, as my guest this evening, we are rather honored to have with us the esteemed Dr. Fletcher, who had served as the director of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Disease under every president, dating back to President Ronald Reagan, having been appointed in 1984, which is certainly representative of considerable experience and well-meriting his description by reporters at Al Jazeera at the beginning of the current global public health crisis as the most trusted voice in separating fact from fiction. Welcome, Dr. Fauci.
Why, thank you, Bill. It is truly a pleasure to be with you and with your audience this evening.
Dr. Fauci, Dr. Anthony Fauci, you, from what one might say the very beginning of the coronavirus crisis, have been one of the leading proponents of what has clearly been the most popularly accepted theory regarding the virus origins, held by many persons of great educational talent. Indeed. And specifically stating that, and if I may quote you, Dr. Buckley, that the most likely explanation is a natural evolution from an animal reservoir to a human, a theory now at least by reports, recent reports, not accepted by intelligence sources at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and now the National Laboratories under the directorship of the Department of Energy. And so perhaps the very first question on this topic of interest would be for you to share your thoughts. Start about it.
Yes. Well, as you know, Bill, I've always said that on this matter, this particular matter, I keep an open mind. And as you know, many reputable scientists, vaccinologists, immunologists, epidemiologists, still predominantly vaccinologists, still predominantly believe the virus occurred naturally in animals and then it spread to humans in an outbreak at a market in Wuhan, China. Also, it is of note, still keeping an open mind, that most of the intelligence community remains either split or leaning toward the natural occurrence theory, the more accepted theory, that scientific investigations have concluded as most likely. In fact, every account that I have read on the latest news has accurately framed this new position of the National Laboratories within the context that they now prefer the lab leak theory, but still hold that opinion with low confidence. And I believe many others would think that that distinction is very important.
Low confidence indeed, Dr. Fauci. And we may return to that discussion a little bit later, perhaps, but for now, considering the at least partial validation in the press of the lab leak theory, this evening, rather than continue the discussions regarding perhaps feelings of validation, certainty of importance to some, I would rather discuss with you this evening the implications arising from this alternative scenario, as it were, about which you, a public record, have stated that you are willing, perhaps not others, but you are willing to keep an open mind. So, speaking only hypothetically, I might emphasize, only hypothetically, not lending any credence whatsoever to the newest revelations that have many talking, one would logically conclude that if the virus had, in fact, as many noted scientists, as you've noted, should we choose, shall we say, a natural spread hypothesis that assumes that the novel coronavirus had come to us in the manner in which most assume, at least, that most viruses do, i.e., from interactions with infected animals and spilling over, as it were. It would be ludicrous to claim that we might have, say, a cause of action, a good case for liability against nature, or, say, God, if so inclined. I doubt the Heavenly Father would be welcome to being hauled into a courtroom. I can't say for sure. However, in the alternative, should one endorse the far less popular alternative, or the lab leak hypothesis that is posited that the novel coronavirus had somehow emerged from a laboratory, say, even from well-intentioned SARS research studies that may have gone wrong, or as a nefarious bioweapon project, a scenario even currently ruled out by those at the Department of Energy. It is important to emphasize we would have to then begin a discussion regarding potential legal liability for externalities, as economists have termed liabilities for damages incurred, aggrieved parties, and perhaps unacceptable, or in the alternative, acceptable losses, costs, say, natural cost of business, when engaged in ventures that do, in fact, pose some risk, for which even the intelligence community had assessed back in May 2021 to be a low to moderate risk of occurring when experimenting with lethal, perhaps even highly contagious biohazards. Do you care to comment, Dr. Fletcher? You know, that's a very, very good question, Bill, and I am certainly glad that you asked it, person of your esteem and intellect. I believe that most would agree that there are risks associated with all human activities, and there were certainly risks associated with space exploration. And the president had noted when we had made the vaccines more available in the American Rescue Plan, the great advances of science in the space program. And we all certainly can recall the tragedies of the Challenger and Columbia shuttle crews. And these individuals, however, I might add, like even that graduate student in Singapore, accept the hazards of their chosen professions, very like many in our military forces certainly do. And certainly a person like yourself would not now or at any point be calling for divestment of funding for military defense programs. And I might mention that in addition to the fine examples of the members of our public health profession and first responders on the front lines of this pandemic,
in England, we had as many as 36 young people aged 18 to 25 who had bravely volunteered for a challenge study, having been inoculated with a wild-type virus intranasally in an open-label, non-randomized study from which research we have gained a fuller and more complete understanding of this virus.
Yes, indeed, Dr. Fauci. I believe that report published in Nature Journal, which I have had the opportunity to read, did not complete its work until the end of March 2022, which is significant, by which time more than 1 million Americans had succumbed to a novel coronavirus, over 90% of whom had been the elderly, over the age of 65, with at least 4 comorbidity factors, as even the CDC has noted just before the approval by the FDA of the product. However, risks that perhaps could have been avoided. And perhaps we can return to that a bit later, Dr. Fauci, but for now, is it not a fact that your dear colleague, Dr. Christian Anderson, at the Scripps Research Laboratories, had even stated in his definitive report regarding the natural origins theory published back in, I believe, March of 2020, that there have been documented instances in Singapore, in fact, in late August 2003, after the SARS outbreak in Hong Kong, and involving a 27-year-old graduate student in microbiology who had been admitted to Singapore General Hospital after working with a strain of non-attenuated or not reduced or weakened, for those not familiar with those terms and not finding sufficient evolutionary pressure to grab a dictionary and perhaps do some research on what that word might mean. Strain of West Nile virus in a biosafety level 3 facility, which is quite secure, I would assume. I do not work in a laboratory. Level 3 sounds pretty high. But which appears, according to the report, to somehow have become contaminated with SARS virus, which infection was somehow, and scientists are still confused as to how this might have occurred, somehow transmitted to this graduate student at a laboratory where work has been acknowledged to have been being performed on the SARS virus, already still in the same year of the SARS outbreak, and indicative of at least some level of negligent conduct to a reasonable person, at least on the part of those running that particular medical research facility. And so my question to you, Dr. Fauci, is whether these perhaps even rarest of variances are an acceptable loss for the advancement of science, as there have been many, particularly in the environmentalist movement, who have decried such risks when associated with other activities with which they may disagree personally, politically, ideologically, such as nuclear power, fracking, and the like, and at least coincidentally correlated, which does not imply causation, as we have often been reminded, all falling well within the oversight of the Department of Energy that has published this newest information. Would you care now to comment, Dr.
Again, Bill, I like to keep it open mind, considering all possibilities, and I believe essentially it gets down to a cost-benefit analysis.
Question, Dr. Fauci, what cost should we be willing to ascribe as acceptable? How many people, shall we say, to be quite frank, must die
I believe, and certainly most would agree, and this is not a popularity contest or a political election, if I may interject, Dr. Fauci, but rather an empirical discussion about what would constitute an acceptable loss. And I've often been reminded that science is not political. And certainly you would agree that had this pandemic been the result of persons well-intentioned working on dangerous biohazards that had resulted somehow in what the World Health Organization has reported as over 6.8 million lives worldwide, exceeding 15 million according to the nation's leading business publication, Wall Street Journal. Even if well-intentioned, directed at prevention of such crises, this work would appear to bring about a rather absurd result in this instance.
Again, and I like to keep an open mind, but I believe, with all due respect to you, Bill, the two are not even comparable at all. And further, I might also add that had it not been for the incredible work done by persons like myself, Dr. Ralph Barrick, Peter Daszak, and others, it is wholly conceivable, wholly conceivable that we would not be talking right now.
Indeed, Dr. Fauci, indeed. Many have said quite a few things about the vaccines, but that is not the point of this elevated discussion tonight, where, as I had stated at the outset, Dr. Fauci, we are only considering a mere hypothetical that I had posed quite clearly, and which is quite analogous to many arguments posed by many environmentalists, for instance, with regard to global climate change, saving the animals and what have you. And quite often within these contexts of these issues, such as the tragedies at, say, the Lord Canal, the Valdez oil spill, and many others, whereas I might suggest certainly the death toll was by far considerably smaller in magnitude. A legal rule first articulated in British courts in 1868, but widely now accepted in most, if not all, American courts, is that when a dependent brings an unnatural condition, which certainly this would be, at least according to several legal precedents, an unnatural or not occurring in nature condition on the line, then the dependent is therefore held strictly liable for all associated harms arising from that introduction of this quite unnatural condition. And some have suggested that this particular coronavirus had even an etiology that was quite singular. And I do find it quite intriguing that this position, even for academic analysis and discussion, has found some reluctance, hesitancy. It has yet to have been raised even by those who have, at least in the past, heralded the decision in Fletcher v. Rylands, which would give rise to a rather reasonable inference of suspicion as to why this has not come up and why persons are not quite welcome to debate on the subject. But I am very sorry, Dr. Fauci, for this is all the time that we have for now. And perhaps at a later date, at some point, we can return with this discussion and for further exploration on your thoughts, if you would grant me again the honor of your esteemed presence in the future, Dr. Fauci. Thank you so much for now, and thanks also to our many viewers, and please feel free to join us next time in discussion on issues of interest on Firing Line. This is William F. Buckley, Jr., and it has been quite a delight. Good evening. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.